Your guys' spring final, part 4, which pretty much goes from 34 to 45. So in 35, you got to convert from degrees to radians. So in order to convert from degrees to radians, you have to multiply it by pi over 180. So multiply, so then all you guys have to do from there is just simplify the fraction. So if you find a bigger number, that's fine as well. But I just initially saw that, okay, you could divide top and bottom by 10 to get negative 51 pi over 18. Then I noticed you could divide both top and bottom by 3 for negative 17 pi over 6. So that's 35. 36, 495, so multiply by pi over 180. And now we have to simplify that fraction of 495 pi over 180. So I initially saw that top and bottom could be divisible both by 45, so then final answer is 11 pi over 4. Now to convert from radians to degrees, you have to multiply by not pi over 180, but 180 over pi. So 180 over pi, I canceled off the pi's, and then I recognized that 6 can be canceled with 180. So 180 divided by 6 would give me 30. 30 times negative 11, negative 330 degrees. 38 multiplied by 180 over pi, so pi's cancel, and then the 18 cancels with the 180. So that gives us 10, so 37 times 10, 370 degrees. Now, state if the angles given are coterminal. So you know two angles are coterminal if you keep on subtracting or adding one by 360, and then if you keep on doing that, and if it lands on the other degrees, then that means they are coterminal. So I decided to go from 220 to negative 320. So if I were to get to 200, if I started at 220 degrees and I needed to get at negative 320, I need to keep on subtracting by a whole circle, which is 360. So 220 minus 360 is negative 140 degrees. That's not negative 320, so I'm going to subtract another 360. But when I subtract another 360 to try to get to negative 320, I got negative 500 degrees. So it passed that point, which means it can't be coterminal, so that answer is no. 4. Again, coterminal angles, if you add or subtract by 360 or 2 pi, then, and you have angles that are added or subtracted by 360, then you'll have coterminal angles. So I'm going to start with 345, and I'm like, okay, to get to 1065, from 345, I have to just keep on adding by 360 in hopes that I get 1065. So 345 plus 360, 705, not 1065 yet, so I'm going to add another 360, and what do you know, it landed on 1065 degrees. So those two are coterminal angles. Okay, so now we got these pi's, so that means we're in radians. So that means we need to add or subtract by 2 pi now. So I'm going to start with pi over 9. So since I'm trying to get from pi over 9 to negative 14 pi over 9, I need to subtract by 2 pi. So subtract by 2 pi, so I put 2 pi over 1 and try to get a common denominator of 9, so multiply top and bottom by 9. So pi over 9 minus 18 pi over 9 is negative 17 pi over 9. Now if you take a look, negative 17 pi over 9 is a lot more negative than negative 14 pi over 9. It's bigger. So that means I passed it, which means that those are not coterminal angles. 42. So I'm just going to start with 3 pi over 2, and I'm going to see if I could get to 11 pi over 2 by adding by 2 pi. So 3 pi over 2 plus 2 pi over 1, multiply top and bottom by 2 so that I can get a common denominator of 2. So 3 pi plus 4 pi is 7 pi over 2. That's not 11 pi over 2, so that means I need to add another 2 pi. And when I add another 2 pi, then what do you know? We land on 11 pi over 2, which means those are coterminal angles. So yes. Alright, reference angle. So recall, for reference angle, it's the angle formed from the terminal side and an x-axis, and it's the smaller angle. So negative 715 degrees is that blue curve, which is pretty much that, or the blue rotation. So here's the terminal side. Oh, I should use a different color. So here's the terminal side, and here's the x-axis. And So now I'm trying to figure out how many degrees is that. Well, we went a whole rotation, which is 360, so 715 minus 360, because we know we already went a whole rotation, which is 355. But then we know this amount is 355, but we know a whole circle is 360. So if we did 360 minus 355, we would have gotten 5, which is where the reference angle is. 44. Alright, so positive 430 degrees. I drew that rotation, which is in blue. Now, I know that since it already went a whole rotation, I should just subtract 360 from that because it just goes back to the same spot. So that's 70 degrees. So this amount is 70 degrees, and that's exactly the angle we're trying to find, because remember, reference angle is the terminal side and the x-axis and what angle that makes for the smaller angle. So that's 70. And lastly, 45. So now this is in radians, so a negative 11 pi over 6. Now, if you guys are not comfortable with using radians, you can always transition to make it be in degrees. So this is what it would be in degrees. So in degrees, it's negative 330 degrees. So that blue is negative 330. So then you're trying to figure out what that is. So if you were using degrees, if you know that's negative 330, you know a whole circle is 360. So 360 minus 330, that means this would have been 30 degrees. And if you had to convert 30 degrees to be in radians, it's times pi over 180. And then you could have just divided top and bottom by 30 in order to get pi over 6. Now, if you were just strictly using radians, then you know the blue is negative 11 pi over 6 radians. You know a whole circle is 2 pi. So you could have done 2 pi minus 11 pi over 6 to figure out what that missing piece is. So then it would have been times top and bottom by 6 for 12 pi over 6 minus 11 pi over 6, which would have given you pi over 6. So many ways you guys can go about it. So that's it for the tutorials on the finals, you guys. So good luck, okay? Thursday and Friday are the finals.